So you worked with their culture. You
That's right.
worked with their ability to get foods, and you didn't say no. You can't have this Caribbean food. You need to have a broiled chicken breast with lemon. Okay, yeah, no, and that's all right. Spot on, fans. I told you I'd be back, and I am back, and I have the launch of season season 9. I get excited when I just say that because I can't believe that it is season 9, and I have to thank you for that. So I wanted to start off on the top. I mean, I always like to start off on the top. So today I brought in my very special colleague, um, Maya Fella. She is a registered dietitian in Brooklyn. She's my peep, Brooklyn with this accent. Yes, you get it. And she's a registered dietitian. She does, one-to-one patient, all about medical nutrition therapy, but she talks to groups. She talks all over the place. She's written other books, and she has a brand new book out called Eating from Our Roots: 80 Healthy Home Cooked Favorites. And you might recognize the name, definitely the face, because now we're on YouTube. Yes, yes, that's the one. She has, you got it. Good Morning America. Yep, you got it. I know you were saying that's what you got it. So with that, I wanna, my good friend Maya, welcome to Spot On.
Joan, thank you so much for having me. I love seeing you by Zoom, over Zoom. I love seeing you in person. I just love to spend time with you.
I just want to tell you, she's starting to dress now in the same colors of the book. Okay, so I just wanted to say this. So she's taken on a whole new image here. It's all about the colors of the book, and she's eating from the roots. Now, this is really interesting because she's written recipe books before, but this is very different. And I'm telling why I love this woman is that she's always on the cutting edge. And I'm telling you, this brand new book, you better get on Amazon ASAP and order it because it's going to be sold out. And you have to wait for them to print it again. Because she's on to something. So I want to know, why did you write this book, my dear?
Well, so first of all, thanks for having me. And when I was thinking about the concept for this book, I went back to, and I love that you said, oh my goodness, I'm starting to dress like the book. And what I have realized over time is that I love cultures from around the world. I love food, and I'm incredibly curious. And so I thought, well, wouldn't it be amazing if I could put all of that together and help people take a culinary trip around the globe, but from their kitchen?
Right, right. And you are so, hate to say this, spot on, because we are now realizing, hello, there is a whole world of wonderful cultures. And you look at every different culture, they all basically have the same healthy ingredients. Yeah. You know me, Italian. We got the pasta, we got the fruits, we got the vegetables, we got the bread, tomato sauce, please. Okay. But if you go to any culture, they're all made up of very similar, yummy foods. And we have to travel around the world, like you said. And really, you have a secret background that I don't have, because if someone said to me, like, write a book about a culture, it would be Italian recipes, like, oh, nobody's ever done that before. But you had this upbringing. And
Yes.
tell us about your childhood, because when I read the book and I read about this, I'm like, holy schmoly, this little girl's passport must have been full by the time she was 12. I'm like, all right, tell us this.
Yeah. So when I was growing up in Massachusetts, I did grow up in this really interesting intellectual family, but like intellectual people who also love to travel. So not just sit down in one spot and say, okay, I'm going to teach. They said like, okay, like we've got to travel around the world and also learn and infuse that into their education.
Mhm, mhm,
And so my biological family is Afro-Caribbean,
mhm.
so Trinidad and Tobago and Haiti. I was born in Cambridge, and I spent the first few years of my life after I was born. I went back to Trinidad and Tobago and lived with my grandparents.
Mhm.
I have all these amazing memories of time there. And then we traveled a lot throughout the Caribbean. We traveled Latin America. We did some like Australia, New Zealand. And then we also traveled parts of Africa. And so from a really young age, I was just exposed to, just like you said, Joan, I was like, oh, everybody has a home garden. You know what I mean? Everyone's using like fresh herbs and spices, and everyone has like a heritage or like heirloom chicken because it was in the yard just eating the grass. And that's the food that as I traveled, like I started to taste. And there was this through line, just like you said, that really food was simple, it was uncomplicated, and it was about creating community, bringing people to a table and nourishing them. And that resonated with me in such an incredible way. In my house, like I love to have people over and I love to bring people to my table. And I think a lot of that comes from all of those early trips and travels and meeting people, but also going into spaces where people were just open and there was always enough for one more.
Right. And that's so true. And what you just said, you traveled and it was, wholesome and it was simple, but you forgot to say something. It was delicious.
Yes, it
Yes.
was
And
delicious.
delicious. Right. And this is what I'm going to love about this book, because, you could travel around the globe with these recipes. I'm going to get to in a minute how they all came about. And really, really get the essence of the flavor, but they're simple. But if you go wherever you go in around the globe, it's simple dishes, beans and rice and pasta and tomato, whatever.
Right.
It's all simple, but it's really, really delicious. Okay, so you got this passport that's full of all these places, and you love to eat. Okay, so now how did you get from that into this world of nutrition?
Yeah, that's actually hilarious, Joan. So it was almost by accident. My undergraduate degree is in experimental theater, and so people are always like, oh, well, that's so cool. That must be why you feel comfortable on TV. And I'm like, no, 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 no. Experimental theater is like avant-garde theater. It is theater of the absurd. So it's not like ready for camera theater. It's more like you're covered in white paint and wrapped in cloths and doing performance art. It was completely bizarre and I loved it. The only challenge is that very few people make a living doing experimental theater. And I had a desire to actually have access to breakfast, lunch, dinner, an apartment that I could pay for.
Could you imagine? Where was your head? Where was your head? You need access to that. Okay. Yeah.
Joan, the question is, I can't believe my lovely parents, they were like, sure, you can study that. Of course you can. Like, in hindsight, I'm like, would I let my kids have baby? I don't know. But so I actually happened upon nutrition because I was training for the Boston Marathon.
Oh.
And I was really interested in figuring out kind of what was happening with food in my body during the training process. And being from a family of academics, there was no question that I was not going to get a certificate, like no certificate. I was going to go back to school for a degree. Right. And so I went back to school for a degree. And that's how I actually ended up studying nutrition. And then once I was in, the study of nutrition, I realized, oh my goodness, this is fantastic. And I have the possibility to connect with people and really learn from them and then also support them on their journey.
Right. And so, again, I always say this often, Maya, that nutrition is a science. It's based on science.
Yes.
And so what you can do, you can fight many of the leading chronic diseases of our time, heart disease, certain cancer, stroke, type 2 diabetes, with a fork and a knife.
Yes,
and it could be a delicious fork and a knife too. And so you went back, got this degree, and now what did you do with it?
So originally I was working, I came out and I went directly into community work. I did my rotations at Sloan Kettering, and so that's oncology. And then from oncology, I actually went into infectious disease. And I found that, interestingly enough, kind of the metabolic processes were very similar in those patient populations. And so when I was working with people who had HIV and AIDS and Hep C, and especially people who were on long-term, antiviral treatments, we saw these metabolic shifts. And we also saw that the foods that people ate really had the possibility to impact the trajectory of their future health outcomes.
Mhm.
And so I mean, I learned a lot. I also in that job learned about social determinants of health.
Mhm.
And I learned that, where a person lives and what they have access to really determines how they interact with food.
Right.
And that's where I learned to talk to people about what is your situation? Where are you? While knowing the clinical outcome that I was hoping for, how
Mhm.
do I get them a step closer to that clinical outcome with whatever their reality is?
Right.
And
But what
so,
right.
mhm,
But what you did, Maya, and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I get so excited. What you did, my dear, is you took your nutrition expertise and you fit it into their life,
exactly,
not the inverse. And people are like, yeah, but no, no, you don't understand. That's very, very unique. So you worked with their culture, you
that's right.
worked with their ability to get foods, and you didn't say no, you can't have this Caribbean food, you need to have a broiled chicken breast with lemon. Okay, yeah, no. And that's, so when I was reading the book, I'm saying, how a little smarty pants. In other words, she was saying, what where you grew up, the foods you grew up with were fine, like, don't make anybody have to do the chicken breast and the brown rice when who likes that anyway. And so that's sort of what I just loved about this whole darn book, is that you gave everybody, wherever the culture say, "You're good, you're healthy," and they're like, "Yay," and it was, the whole thing's fascinating to me.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly right. And one of the things, just like you said, Joan, that I saw as we traveled the globe, and my husband's Swiss and actually was born in Switzerland and is the only person in his family that is in the US. So like he's like
Mhm.
super Swiss, like really Swiss. Um, and when I went there for the first time, and I met people in the city, but then I also like had the opportunity to meet these like alpine farmers and these people who had been, engaging in these farming practices for like generations. I was like, oh my gosh, they're just like the people in the Caribbean who've been engaging in farming for generations. And guess what? They make bread every day, right? It's the water, the salt, sometimes there's yeast, but like they make bread from scratch the same way that my Italian chef friend, Chef Sylvia Barbon, makes pasta from scratch, right? It's like, it is fascinating to see what these heritage patterns of cooking look like. And then when you step back, you're like, oh, wow, it's really simple. It's really delicious, as you said, right?
Right.
But it's based in not that many ingredients.
Right, and it was what was local, and they made it delicious, and the whole family around, and, it's like the loaves and the fishes, like, you always had enough food for the next person. If someone next door came with a family of 5, you still had enough food,
That's
it's just that whole, cultural, wonderful embrace. Now, what I love many things about this book, but you talk about the chefs and how you created these recipes, because this is not just from your journal of moving around the world. So
right.
explain this. Right.
So one of the things that I know is like as a dietitian, there's a lot that I've learned and that I have ingrained in my dietitian soul around food.
Mhm.
And full disclosure, we are not likely to use added sugar, added salt, and added fats in our food. We're just not likely to. And I knew that if I was going to make a cookbook that really was representative of the globe, I needed help with the mindful inclusion of those additives.
Mhm.
And I needed to work with people who had experience in these cuisines, wherever they were going to come from. So I actually amassed this very diverse group of chefs. They're all people of color or women.
Mhm.
Um, and there are some recipes that I developed myself 100%.
Mhm.
I sure everyone can figure out which ones they are. There are lots of plants. There's the ones that have no sugar, salt, or fat. No, there's a little salt. There's a little salt.
And it says something like inspired by my grandmother.
Right. And so some of like the Trinidadian recipes are definitely me. But so I worked with these chefs and, we came up with these wonderful flavors, and there is that very mindful inclusion. And what I saw was in my education of how to include some of those, additives, was that not only did we enhance the flavor,
Mhm.
but we made it more likely that people will actually return to preparing the recipe.
That's exactly correct. That's it. We know this, Maya. The number one reason why people make food choice is taste.
Right.
And so you can have wonderful taste and what you say, mindful amounts of added sugars and sodium and oils. Healthy oils are fine, but mindful. But the key is, right, when you're using like fresh herbs and everything, you don't need a lot of salt. Oh,
That's
just
right.
a little, just
That's
a
right.
little to pep it up a little bit, but you don't, because they know how to combine blend foods together, which is just amazing. So you had these chefs in your house
No,
cooking?
so
Oh, whew,
actually there was just one chef,
right,
because every single recipe in the cookbook is actually tested by a chef. That's just part of how,
right.
it had to be in order for it to be like a real cookbook. So there was one main chef that, over a very hot summer a couple of years ago, and we were in the shutdown portion of the pandemic. So, I mean, we really didn't have kitchen assistants and and I say this, Joan, I have 5 burners on my stove and I really need 8. I have one big size oven and a speed oven. I really need 4. I have one sink. I really need 2. And we literally tested every single recipe. I made modifications, and I made modifications where like I added in more plants. I did modify
Mhm.
some of the ingredients, and in a respectful way though, right?
Right.
So it wasn't like I was like, oh, that's not the, I was very
Right.
respectful.
Like no curry, no curry. No, of course there's curry, whatever it
Right,
is. Right.
exactly.
That's what, and I bet, because if they were, these, chefs, they're passionate and they have, what they're cooking. So I bet they were very like, possessive about their food. Like, no, don't start touching around my recipe. Like I
Believe
can
it or
imagine.
not.
Right.
No, not at
No.
all. And not at all. And so here's the thing is that every chef that I know, they want to nourish people. They want
Mhm.
people to love their food.
Yeah.
And they also know I'm a dietitian, right? At the base of everything, I am talking about culturally relevant foods, but I'm also talking about making sure that people have great health outcomes.
Right.
So they understood that what I'm trying to do is make it more likely that the home cook is going to say, you know what, I want to try this really interesting flavor. And I want to think about, do I eat it as the recipe is written? Or do I prepare it with a modification based on my individual health needs?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so they were aware that that's really what I want people to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everyone can have French toast. Absolutely. Now you modify the French toast based on your individual health. If you need to increase the fiber, you can change the bread, right? If you need to reduce the fat, then maybe you're thinking about using yogurt, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or maybe even something else, right? Maybe you're going to top it just with fruit instead. You want to bring up the flavor without the added sugar, then maybe you're using cinnamon, spice, nutmeg, something like that. I mean, there's so many things that you can do when you have a base that you can work with.
Right. And so these hints are in the book, these
Yes.
hints. And so I want people to understand that first of all, they're chef approved, because how many times do you get a cookbook and maybe 50% of the recipes are really good. But now we know that there was, a chef was on top of everyone with you. And so they're not going in this book unless they're really, really good. But then if you come into this, there's guidance about how to make those modifications. And
Exactly.
so, again, I can't tell you, I've the pictures are gorgeous. If you could eat the pictures, it would be good because they're probably high fiber because they're made out of paper. But I'm just telling you, the pictures are that gorgeous that you want to you eat them. But it's so phenomenal. And I just love this idea that we just said to everybody that your culture is healthy and
Yeah.
delicious. So what is your goal, Miss Maya? What is your goal for this book?
So I hope that this book actually encourages people to expand their flavor palettes
Mhm.
and encourages people to return to their kitchens.
Mm.
Right, Joan? And also on top of that, I really hope that also people, because there's a huge love letter to farmers in my cookbook, and I hope that people recognize that without farmers, we don't have food.
Right.
And farmers' goal across the board is to make sure that we have access to food. So like, I want us to have diverse foods in our kitchens, in our pantries. I want us to love the farmers, the growers, the pickers, the packers, right? And then I want us to love the flavors.
Right.
That's really what I hope this book can bring forth, highlight, and inspire.
Right. And we know, Maya, that when you go back to the kitchen, when you eat more meals at home, the
Yes,
quality of the meal goes up because it tends to be more produce, more fruits and vegetables, which most of us are not getting enough of.
yes,
We know that automatically the saturated fat and the sodium goes down because you're eating out less.
yes.
But what do we know about family meals, Maya?
That they
Coming to
set the stage for our future behaviors,
right,
right?
right.
And so I mean, I do want families to sit down together and dine together. I want them to also have that table be a place where, that there are memories that are made. I work with a lot of families, and one of the things that I talk to all of them is like, how can you all find the time to sit together?
Right, right. And I've been saying this for a while, but let's not waste a good pandemic. Okay, so the one thing, many positive things came out of the pandemic, one of which is telehealth, but the other is it forced us to be in the kitchen and go back to that. I mean, how many relationships you called grandma, well, grandma, what was that chicken recipe you made? And so you got back some of that
Yes,
culture. And we need to do that because I think a lot of us have lost that, what
yes,
grandma made.
yes,
And what I love about the pandemic, it made us make that connection, but more importantly, with your new book, Eating from Our Roots, 80 plus healthy home cooked favorites. I don't have to go to Logan Airport to travel around the world. I could just open up your cookbook and stay home and cook.
and that's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I hope that, when the book is on sale on the 24th of January, right now it's available for pre-orders. But I hope that, yeah, people look at it also as like a little travel guide, that there are flavors and that they're there, that they say, oh, this is familiar, right? Oh, I remember this. Or, oh, I want to give that a try.
Right.
I hope
And
that
it,
it does all
right.
of that.
Yeah, and it's low risk because we know that you and a chef work together and you wouldn't have put it in until it was just spot on. How do you like that? I got that in there. Okay. Anyway, Miss Maya Fella, thank you so much for coming and sharing this book again, Eating from Our Roots, 80 plus healthy home cooked favorites. And I can tell you right now, it's my favorite. So once again, thank you for being on Spot On.
Joan, thank you so much for having me, and thank you to all your listeners.